Hello, and welcome to today's program. I'm Diane Okonski, your host. Before we get started, I just have two reminders. First, we encourage you to submit your questions throughout the program using Zoom's Q&A feature, and we will answer as many as we possibly can. Second, today's program is being recorded and will be available on the INLUS website, www.inlus.org, and on our YouTube channel. This summer, I participated in the Snorri Plus program, a 2-week educational opportunity in Iceland for people over 30, which means you don't have to be Icelandic to participate. During the first week, we had a number of speakers on a wide variety of topics. And one of the most interesting to me was a session by today's speaker on the history of Icelandic food. Once I heard her speak, I knew that we needed to get her on a webinar with us. And I'm so happy to have with us today Beth Rogers, who will be talking on that same subject. So let me introduce you to her. Beth is an instructor and PhD student at the University of Iceland in Reykjavik, studying topics of food history and medieval Icelandic culture for her thesis, On with the Butter, the Cultural Significance of Dairy Products in Medieval Iceland. She has completed an MA in Medieval Icelandic Studies, and in addition, she has a master's in education in secondary education and has taught in Taiwan, the US, and Iceland, including the University of Iceland's first massive online open course in which they had 5,000 students enrolled worldwide. So she has lots of experience teaching students from ages 5 through adults. And if that isn't enough, Beth has written more than 30 popular and academic articles, including 2 book chapters, on such varied topics as Viking dairy culture, salt in the Viking Age and medieval period, food as a motif in the Russian primary chronicle, and the literary structure of the Volsunga saga. Her other research interests include medieval literature, especially the sagas, military history, emotions in literature, Old Norse mythology and folklore, and cultural memory. She has also served as a historical consultant for an episode of the BBC Channel 4 show Food Unwrapped, which featured Icelandic spirits. Wow, Beth, I don't know how you've had time to add all this together and get all this stuff in. Thank you so much for joining us today and taking time out of your busy schedule. I know that you've got a lot to tell us, so I'm just going to turn the program over to you.
Fantastic. Okay. Hi, everyone. Um, Glad to meet you all today. As Diane said, my name is Beth, and I'm going to share with you some things that I've learned about Icelandic food culture and how that affects what we think we know and what we know about Icelandic culture even today. At the end, I'll be doing a short demonstration of how to make skyr, which is an Icelandic cheese product. And of course, you are very welcome to ask me any questions you have, as Diane and Doug both mentioned. Oops. Alrighty. Let me see if I can take the lock off of my stovetop. I'm going to need that in a little bit. And let me go ahead and share my screen with you all. Alrighty. So to get started today, yes, as Diane mentioned, my name is Beth, and I'm a food historian and a medievalist, also a teacher. I have no idea how I managed to do all the things, but I'm really interested and excited about all the things, so I do my best. And I do have a new email address there, Bethany@HÍ, which is how we say Háskóli Íslands or the University of Iceland in Icelandic. And so if you guys would like to contact me there with any questions or thoughts that you might have, please do. And don't worry, you'll see that email address again. Okay, so what are we going to talk about today? Well, we're going to talk for about 30 minutes on cheese making and what happens as far as a biochemical reaction, what's really going on in there when cheese is being formed from simple milk and other dairy products. Then we're going to talk about how this relates to food in the Viking Age and medieval Iceland, what it all means. And then I'm going to stop telling you what I know and I'm going to show you what I know. We're going to see how easy it is to make a Skyr product at home, which is actually really fun. And I think you guys will enjoy it a lot. So let's get started. Here we go. Cheese making. So, how do you make cheese? Most of you guys may know cheese is a product that is formed and produced in a range of flavors, textures, and formed by the coagulation of the milk protein casein. So, this is the one that you have trouble digesting along with lactase if you are lactose intolerant. And so, it comprises proteins and fat from milk, usually the milk of cows. That's what we make it out of today. But in a culture like medieval Iceland, of course, the milk and cheese and butter would have mostly come from sheep. And I'll get into why that was in just a minute. So during production, milk is usually acidified, so we add something acidic to the milk to cause a certain reaction. So the enzymes of rennet or bacterial enzymes with similar activity are added to the casein and it causes it to coagulate. And so solid curds are then separated from the liquid whey and pressed into finished cheese. So that is why when you make skyr, you end up with two actually very useful products for the Icelandic people. You end up with your skyr, which is the cheese product on the bottom, and all of the whey will have come to the top when those molecules split open. And you can use the whey, and we call it in Icelandic mesa. You can actually cool it and chill it and drink it. It's bubbly and tart and tangy. Or you can use it because it is acidic in nature to preserve different foods. In the old days of medieval Iceland, people would put everything in a bowl of whey just to keep any kind of spoilage from beginning that horrible, horrible process because food was so very important in medieval Iceland. And of course, as we know, there was no refrigeration or modern methods to keep it fresh. Okay, so as we go along, as you know, first we have milk, and then this is that process that I was just discussing with you. First milk, and then it is formed into curds by that process of acidification that splits the molecules in the liquid open and releases all of the whey from the milk solids. Then you put this solid stuff, this cheesy goodness, into a form. Usually it's round, and then we got a nice cheese wheel out of it. And then, of course, during the salting period, you can add salt or herbs or spices. And then at the very end of the process, it's left to age. And so what does aging do? Well, again, many of people in the world are lactose intolerant. So even though they might come from a culture such as Iceland, which has a rich and beautiful history in milk and cheese making, they might not be able to enjoy that without getting a tummy ache. So the longer a cheese is aged, the more lactase will evaporate out of the cheese product. So if you get yourself a really nice, good, well-aged, hard cheese, you may find yourself able to enjoy a few bites, even if you are lactose intolerant. Another good tip for those of you who love the idea of cheese, but your tummy doesn't like it so much, is goat cheese is actually lower in lactase naturally, goat milk rather, than sheep or cow's milk. And so if you are lactase intolerant, or lactose intolerant rather, you might be able to enjoy goat milk products instead. So that's something to try if you're feeling very brave. And of course, in the corner in the circle, you see it says symbiosis. That is a link to a page here at the University of Iceland, just to give you guys an idea what kind of current research is still going on with these kinds of ideas and the importance of food and all the beautiful things that we can learn and understand about the way we make our food, eat our food, celebrate our food as part of a culture. The Symbiosis project specifically is taking a look at what actual, and here I get into trouble because I use a very dangerous word, authentic Icelandic skier was like in the medieval ages. So they are actually um, experimenting outside of our usual places of creating food in the modern world, which are very clean and regulated and pasteurized as they should be. But because of that, they are not quite what our ancestors might have tasted when they tucked into their daily bowl of skyr. And so Symbiosis, the folks who are researching that project, are going around collecting all kinds of samples that you might find on the average Icelandic farm to try and reverse engineer whatever an authentic Icelandic skyr might taste like. And they have all sorts of cultural questions and things that they are looking to answer. So if you're interested, you can read more about it at that page there. Okay, and so this is actually a picture on a microbial level of what's going on in the cheese when you are making the magic happen. So when a dairy product is in its liquid form, like you see there on the left side, the casein is just floating free in the liquid. Life is good, it's beautiful. Then of course lactic acid bacterium is there in the milk. It's part of it naturally. And then, of course, we have those big, beautiful fat globules, which are also floating around in the liquid that give it its rich and creamy flavor that many of us love our milk products for. And so the black arrow in the middle represents the change that happens when an enzyme, such as, for example, rennet, which is a piece of cow stomach, which is how it was typically made before modern food production could sort of replicate this process without using rennet. And then what happens is the acid forms sort of a net. It forces all those casein enzymes to form like a net and connect together. And in this net, the liquid, the whey, slips through the spaces in this little net. But of course, the lactic acid and the fat globules are gathered closer together. So that's what's happening in a very close look when we add the acid in. So the molecules will split open and release that delicious liquid, which will then go to the top. That's also why even if you have a store-bought yogurt or something, sometimes if you open the lid, you'll see there's some clear liquid floating on the top. That's your whey. So your yogurt was processed, but it wasn't quite finished releasing its whey before it was put on the grocery store shelf. And so it's perfectly safe to eat, very healthy for you. But now you know. There you go. So what is it about these products that are so fascinating and delicious? Well, I can't always speak for for my students, but of course my cats sure love it. This is a picture of my lovely boy who is watching some of the skyr that I've recently made hang up overnight so that more of the whey can drain out of the product into the bowl below. And it says on the slide smjörkattur because in folklore and myth, the butter cat, which is what smjörkat translates to, is a familiar of a popular figure in folklore called the milk-stealing witch. So this is a product that people had a lot of value and a lot of use for. It was very necessary to daily life in Northern Europe. And so they were very vigilant of anything that could interfere with the food supply, especially something supernatural, such as a milk-stealing witch and her companion, the Smjörkat. Okay. So with that as our entry, let's talk a little bit more about food in Viking Age and medieval Iceland. So as many of you may know, being part of the group that you are, Iceland was settled around 860 AD. And this map that you see on the slide just gives you an idea of where people were settling. Each black triangle, for example, is a farmhouse in the original settlement period, as far as we've been able to determine from things like archaeological digs and other records. And then we have evidence from the sagas themselves, our great Icelandic literature. This one, for example, says, when Skallagrim's flock grew in number, they were allowed to roam the mountain pastures for the whole summer. Noticing how much better and fatter the animals were that ranged on the heath, and also that the sheep could not be brought down for the winter, who could not be brought down for the winter, survived in the valleys. He had a farmstead built up by the mountain and ran from there where his sheep were kept. In this way, Skallagrimur put his livelihood on many footings. So this is sort of a pun in that Skallagrimur himself put his livelihood on many footings, meaning he had many sources of food and value and wealth for himself and his family, but he also literally put his livelihood on many footings, as in the feet of his beautiful flock of sheep. So we can't ever forget what scenes like these in the sagas tell us. It was so necessary in order to survive in early Iceland to have lots of streams of income, they would call it in modern language. You got to have plenty of side gigs to keep yourself afloat for sure. And this is just one example of that in Icelandic literature. So what is it about these animals? Well, the main story and idea of agriculture in Iceland is that when the first settlers came along in 860 AD, what they wanted to do was create their own idea of what a big, beautiful, wealthy farmstead should look like. And for the place that they came from, which was primarily Norway and Denmark, big, beautiful farmsteads had dozens and dozens of sheep, which were large animals, but they gave you a lot in exchange. So you got milk, hides, traction power, meat, obviously. They were less adaptable than, for example, sheep to low quality grazing areas. They didn't really like mountainous areas. But again, when we're talking about Norway, that's okay. We've got plenty of space. Norway is a large, large place. We can find a good spot for our herd of cattle. They're also susceptible to insect-borne diseases, so they're a little bit more delicate and more difficult to keep healthy. But you know what? That's okay, because Norway and Denmark are also attached to the continental mainland of Europe, and so they also have access to veterinary medicines and new innovations that are spreading throughout Europe, etc. Putting it in that context, it becomes very clear that Iceland was a little bit different. Iceland, compared to Norway and Denmark at this time, they were isolated, it was different, and most importantly, it was in a different biome. So Norway, for example, is in a biome that is cold and dry, of course, but Iceland is all the way up north in a subarctic biome. So it is very difficult to grow things, to have beautiful weather that is going to support your family and your farm every day. Any of you guys who have visited Iceland, I'm sure, can remember how tempestuous, let's say, our ecology is. And that, of course, is part of its charm. So we love it. On the other hand, when compared to cattle, sheep were actually a little bit easier to deal with, even in such a difficult place as Iceland. So you got meat and milk from sheep rather easily. They were very adaptable and they're drought tolerant, as the short excerpt from Skallagrimur shows on the slide previous. We also know that they can do very well if they're left alone. Those sheep that couldn't be brought in for the winter were just fine. So right away, that's much better than the cattle. And this is even before we factor in the increasing importance of wool as the medieval period goes on. Iceland became well known for its woolen homespun cloth. It's called vaðmál in Icelandic. And this was such an important trade good that it was used more or less as currency. We have some examples of, for example, ships inventories that recommend if you're going to go trading, in Northern Europe, you should take 3 kilometers worth of vodmal with you to have some good trade goods. And then, of course, there are goats. Goats only give you meat and milk, but the great thing about goats is that per goat, they are quite small, quite easy to take care of. And also, they do give more milk per animal than even a sheep does. They're more drought tolerant than sheep, and they will eat anything, even your shoes. So it was a poor household indeed, according to Mary Williams, speaking in the 1920s about Iceland's agricultural history, if the household did not have a goat. So right there, we can see already that there is sort of a social class arising out of these animals' very struggle to exist in Iceland. So for cattle, only the best and wealthiest farmers with the most available good quality land could afford to have a herd of cattle. In the middle were most other Icelanders with sheep. And then, of course, if they were very poor, or lived in terrible quality land, such as in the Northwest, we have a lot of erosion. Historically, we've always had a lot of erosion. They might want to have goats there just in case to make sure that their families can survive. And so already we can see sort of things divvying up in Iceland between the haves and have-nots. Okay, so what is it all about? The food supply that is just difficult. And this is something that I keep coming back to again and again, even when I teach a full class on Icelandic history, for example. After the third or fourth ecological disaster, such as an epidemic or a famine or a volcanic eruption, my students start asking, why do people live here? Well, the shortest answer is we love it. We don't know. But also, when the Icelanders first arrived, it was actually a bit warmer. There was a medieval warming period going on between 950 and 1250. So actually, it was a little bit nicer, a little bit easier for people to live in Iceland at this period. Before the end of the medieval warm period in 1250, we do have accounts of grain growing in Iceland in small quantities, but still, we could be proud of that. By the 15th century, though, it was completely unheard of, and the hay for animal feed is the only crop of serious importance. Everything else is all about either what we can pull from the natural world around us in Iceland or from those livestock animals. So precious, we cannot deny. And so that hierarchy of value that I was just talking about between the cattle, the sheep, and the goats is also visible in things that we have, such as fence histories and things like this. The layout of the Nordic farm around the year 1000, so in the first generation or two after settlement, looked something like this. And you can see right there that the longhouse is the center of the Icelandic farm, of course, but right next to the longhouse are the cattle. And that's because they're most easily accessible the closer they are to home. Also, women are the ones who can access them most easily, so they can come out of the house. If they have children with them, you can hold the baby in one arm and milk the cow with the other. If you need to check on these animals, you can do that fairly quickly, even in the middle of the night, things like that. And so behind the cattle there are the breeding sheep and the milking sheep. And then further away and left to roam are the ones who are non-breeding sheep. So they're older, they're mostly going to be used for meat someday or for trade. That we're not really worried about those guys, and they can be left to roam. Another thing I'd bring your attention to as far as this picture goes is the little red fenced area that's around the longhouse. That's what's called the home field. And inside this small area is where you would grow the hay to feed your animals. That's why it's fenced off, because you want to make sure that your animals aren't eating all of the hay before you're ready to dole it out. It's a very precious resource And once you don't have any more, you're done for the season. We also have examples of that in the sagas where Icelanders were very generous with their neighbors and their friends and gave them their resources. But then, unfortunately, they didn't leave themselves enough of a supply of hay, and so it led them to trouble and tragedy in proper saga fashion. Okay, so basically, the idea is this: as time goes on, it becomes more and more difficult to survive in Iceland and have that created idea of what it means to be a proper, civilized, wealthy farmer. They would like to mimic those beautiful farms that they had, that they remember in Norway and Denmark. But in Iceland, it's just not possible to sustain everything that you need to keep a farm like that going over time, especially not when you have to worry about volcanoes and black plague and smallpox and all the strange and beautiful things that can happen to a culture during the Middle Ages. And so, although they had created this idea of a social system around landbúnaður, which is the word for farming, they were forced to go back to fishing, veiða. So this was a step backwards in terms of the way that the medieval people created the idea of civilization and the idea that this was the proper way to live. Taking resources directly from the environment was never meant to be something that was done in the long term. You were supposed to be able to, sort of carve your own civilization out of the chaos of raw nature rather than being forced to take from it. If you want to sort of envision this, this is actually what food historians believe the purpose of a story like, for example, the parable of Adam and Eve. It's meant to be sort of showing the shift in civilization as Adam and Eve were first gatherers, hunters. They took directly from nature and it was paradisical and they were very happy. But then, due to their actions, they were forced to leave this place and then they toiled in the rocky, stony ground and it was very difficult. And so, a lot of historical people and especially food historians point to stories like this as illustrations of this shift from hunter-gathering to agrarianism. We're meant to, according to these stories, we're meant to be people who work the land and create the civilization rather than people who just take from nature. That's not as civilized, not as good. Okay, so, before I forget, this was a huge feature of Icelandic culture as well, but by the 16th or 17th century, without modern technology, Icelanders had really started to bump up against the edge of what was possible in Iceland. We wouldn't really recover our food culture until the 1900s and our ability to farm reliably until modern technology in the mid 1900s was available. And so the Danish king, because by this time we were a colony of Denmark, the Danish king sent a letter to Icelanders and he said, "What are you doing? You're abandoning your farms. You're not taking care of your livestock. Remember that you are a people who have a valuable practice of transhumanism, which is a fancy word, transhumance, fancy word for herding." And of course, the Icelanders said, "What do you know, man? You don't live here." So this this decree by the King of Denmark wasn't really received all that well from the Icelanders, as far as we know. The great thing about living in Iceland and being a historian here, though, is so much is often available still. They are actually in one of the archives in Reykjavik looking for the physical letter that I'm speaking of right now. So we are great keepers of knowledge here in Iceland. But just to give you an idea of what else was or wasn't available naturally in Iceland, these were really our only other resources other than our livestock and fishing. So we had horses, cod, whales, seals, driftwood, charcoal, turf, and stones, which were a variety of homes in the medieval period, and bog iron, which was refined from certain swampy, boggy areas that created the right circumstances for a form of iron. And that's pretty much it. We really depended on trade as soon as things like the Hanseatic League got going in the medieval period as well. That really brought a wealth of ideas and new products to Iceland because we were just out here doing the most to survive any way that we could, honestly. So if I was going to sum up for you guys, animal husbandry in the North Atlantic, um, it basically is thus. In the settlement period, wild resources were employed while they waited for those livestock numbers to grow because Viking longships are pretty cool, yes, but they are also a little bit on the small side. They're very light, so you can't bring a whole lot of specimens of sheep or cattle with you when you move to Iceland from Norway. So you have to wait for your cattle to grow. By the 9th and 10th century, though, they had managed to grow their herds pretty well, and cattle became a status symbol due to the upkeep and resources needed to support large herds. However, this is where the turn starts to happen. In the early Commonwealth period, which is the 11th and 12th centuries, cattle, sheep, and goats begin to dominate the collections, especially sheep. And then, of course, in the later medieval to early modern times, that's the 14th to the 18th century, fish become king in almost all bone evidence that we have. Goats are replaced with food and wool-producing sheep. What that tells us is that Vathmal, the woolen homespun cloth, has become very important culturally as well. So these kinds of things, these kinds of details can actually tell us a lot about not only what's going on in a certain culture at a certain time, but also how things are changing over time as things go on. And so, yeah, that's about all I have to share with you. First, please do let me know if you have any questions, and then we'll get right on to our demo. So, and once again, of course, there's my email if any of you guys would like to share anything with me or ask me any other questions that we don't have time for today. Diane, did we have any questions?
Well, I have one. Um,
Sure.
as you've discussed, you can make cheese with goat's milk, sheep's milk, goat's milk, cow's milk. Do they, how is the taste different, or is there a taste difference between the types of milk that you use?
That's a great question. Actually, I think it's kind of subjective. I don't really, I find, of course, for a lot of us, cow's milk was the standard, and it's what we've been drinking since we were children. So for us, that wouldn't taste sort of quote unquote normal. That one just sort of tastes every day and basic, sort of maybe baseline would be a good word for what milk should taste like. On the other hand, goat's milk and sheep's milk, they tend to be a little bit more gamey, a little bit more musky. Hello, a little fuzzy guy who's come to join us. And and so, yeah, I mean, they are absolutely wildly different from one another. It can vary as well. When you're talking about a full microbial audience in your cheese, meaning that, it's not fully pasteurized and refined and all of those things removed. Those are the flavor causing elements of your cheese. When all of that stuff was going full bore, before the days of high food processing, then it could be the case where, each farm had its own sort of flavor profile for its cheese and butter and things like that. And that's actually what the symbiosis project is trying to sort of explore and ask themselves. So we'll see what they come up with, I think.
Okay. All right. Well, please get your questions in to Beth. And I have just another question.
Sure.
Um, you know, as the classes were formed in Iceland, you had the landowners and you had the slaves or the people who worked for them. And then you had the freed slaves who, were kind of set out on their own for the most part, as I understand it. Were those lower classes able to have um, the means or the wherewithal to have a goat or a sheep, or how did they survive until they got to the point where they could afford something like that?
A great question. Um, well, first of all, according to the law, so this is coming from Graugaus, the Grey Goose, the official law book of medieval Iceland. Um, a house is not a household without until it has livestock, says the law. So basically, these people wouldn't have an official an official residence until they had come up with some way to procure themselves livestock. That could mean either saving something up, or relying on a generous friend, any sort of method by which they could get an animal. And then, of course, as they increase their wealth and standing in the community, they would want to sell their goats and maybe have a sheep or two. And then if they could, if they were really lucky and really careful in the alliances and friendships they made, perhaps they could work their way up to having a small herd of cattle. So, great question though.
So life was pretty tough.
Life was pretty tough. As I said, my students like to sort of they're very patient usually for the first few weeks, but after the 11th disaster or so, they start really asking, like, why do people live here? And it's like, well, I guess they got used to it, you guys. What do you want me to say?
Okay. Well, why don't we go ahead and get started on the demonstration, Beth? And if you want to stop sharing your screen so that we can see you, that would
Okay,
be great.
absolutely. Ta-da. Okay, here is my face in some form. Okay. Okay, so let me go ahead and welcome to my kitchen, everyone. I'm going to tilt the camera just down a little bit so you can sort of see my cooking top. I have to show you today, first of all, this book, if any of you guys are interested in Icelandic history and food, this is called An Early Meal, a Viking Age cookbook and culinary odyssey by Daniel Serra and his co-author, Hannah Thunberg. Sorry, I always forget her name. This is a really lovely book for anybody who's interested in archaeological finds and sort of food evidence that we have from the historical record. And I have it memorized by heart. Right here on page 54, you can find Ski. Okay, so there's what Skyr looks like in the old days, and I'm happy to provide a copy of this very simple recipe to Diane and Doug if you all are interested. I'm just gonna pop that there, and we're gonna get started. Let's see. Okay, I just have a little pot here. Then I have cheesecloth, any size really, wooden spoon. I have a string for hanging it up, and of course, scissors, and a little measuring cup. And that's basically all we need except for our ingredients, and there are only two. So here we go. Then my little assistant is creeping up in the back. If I'm paying any attention, there he is. Okay. Okay, so for this, we just have two ingredients, and this is Icelandic Skyr-Mjölk. This is very simple. This is something you can get in the grocery store. It's exactly what it sounds like, sour milk. So if you don't have this, you can, of course, use let's see, anything with an acid in it, because this is what's going to provide that acidifying effect to our milk product. So you can use vinegar or lemon juice, for example, and add it to regular milk to introduce that effect, or buttermilk as well. You can also use that. And then our second ingredient is good old rjómi, or cream in English. And make sure that it has at least 33% fat. We need a good old fatty product so that when the acid convinces those beautiful molecules to make that casein chain and they gather up in that beautiful net that you saw in the picture earlier, that they will have something to hold on to, some fat globules, when they release the whey. If you try to be really healthy and go for a lean milk, it's just like when you try to whip a cream that's got too low fat. The magic is just not going to happen for you guys. So let yourself have a little treat and go for the full fat cream. Alrighty, so all we do, I'm gonna go ahead and turn on the burner here. And do let me know if you want me to adjust anything. I will move the camera so you can see the acidifying effect. Okay, but we're gonna do 300 of our cream, 300 milliliters, I should say. Okay, that's gonna go in there. 1, 2, 3. So good, almost perfect. Alrighty, and then after that, we put in 2 whole liters, so both of our containers of Skyr-Milk. Okay, so here we go with a big glug glug glug. It's very thick. Okay. Ooh. We need a little bit more Skyr-Milk because we want to get lots of skyr out of this. So let's put in the other liter. In the Icelandic sagas, we have a story of a man called Gissur Thorvaldsson, who was a great politician and historian in medieval Iceland. He was also a very powerful politician and was actually at one point the Jarl of Iceland. He was given that title by the King of Norway. And so that made his enemies very jealous. And so one night in medieval Iceland, they came to kill him. Yes, that's right. The Vikings didn't play nice. And so in order to escape his political detractors, he actually dashed out of the house into the dairy in the middle of the night, and he hunkered down inside the freezing cold skyr vats. So that gives you an idea of how much skyr they made at this time and exactly what kind of abundance we're talking about. It was enough to, for a fully grown man to swim in. And actually his political enemies, they searched the house for him, and they even tried to put their spears in the skyr and give it a poke, but they did not find it. Or they did not find him, rather. And so he was able to make it to a nearby church and claim sanctuary. So, skyr saves lives. What can I say, you guys? Okay, so we're just gonna give it a little stir to mix up that cream and all that lovely fat and that acid. We want to make sure that they are together and doing their thing. But other than a good stir, we don't have to do anything else to it. We're just going to increase the heat a little. I have this on a medium heat right now, and wait for the magic to happen. Usually you can put it on maybe about 15 minutes or so, and it will start doing the thing. I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. In the meantime, do we have any other questions?
Not that have come in.
Not that have come in.
Your kitty cats are just so cute in the background.
They, you guys, what can I say? They're big fans of cream themselves.
Uh,
Ooh, yeah. This is my other smear cat. His name is Skuggi, which
okay,
means shadow in Iceland.
very, very good name. Very good name.
Yes. Yes, we give them proper saga names. His name is Skuggi. Oh my goodness, I've forgotten. Oh, Morthramur, which means Shadow Death Paw.
Okay,
Yes, proper Viking names for my cats. The other one is Skotli Drakaspanni, which means Impy Dragon, a Dragon's Bane.
wow.
Yeah, I'm raising proper children. Okay, it's happening a little bit, but I'm going to go ahead and give it another minute so that we can see if, oh my goodness, here we go. I'm going to give it another minute to give something a bit more visible. It's very subtle right now.
Yeah, I was amazed at how quickly everything came together when you did your demonstration this summer. It was just an amazing, amazing feat. As I told you, I have a recipe for a skyr that you cook overnight in the oven. So it
Yes,
gets to be it gets to be a
absolutely.
pretty long multi-day process just to get to the point of draining it or pressing the whey out of it. So this was very quick,
Oh
quick.
yes, it's very speedy. Uh-huh. One thing
So
that
we
was,
do have a question that has come in.
oh great.
And it said, Sarah is asking about when did the forests of Iceland disappear, and was it all due to human use of trees?
Well, that's a great question because the answer is yes and also no. So when did the trees disappear? Which is always a big question for Iceland. We have very few trees here. It's actually part of our culture to try to restore the trees every year before the start of a new school year. There's usually school groups that go out and plant tree seeds. It's quite cute and very ecologically minded. But as far as when they went away, we know from Are Thorgilsson, which was another one of our great Icelandic historians and writers, that when the settlers arrived, Iceland was supposedly wooded, according to Icelandic book, wooded from the mountains to the coast. So the entire island was covered in trees. And we can also verify that one in the archaeological record. We can see that according to the layers of earth, that at one point, yes, there were many, many trees in Iceland. And then people arrived. And so it was, they cleared a lot of land to make those farms that they remembered from back in Norway to create this proper, wealthy farming world that they wanted to have in Iceland. The other thing is the animal that was missing from my list. All of them, cattle, sheep, and goats, will effectively bulldoze the landscape, essentially. But pigs are the worst offenders. And so people often ask me why I don't have pigs on my list. Well, one, we don't drink pig's milk, and the center of my research is dairy. But also, Icelanders were pretty quick to get rid of their pigs because not only will pigs eat the vegetation, but they will tear up the roots, which in Iceland, you need every possible help you can get to encourage a tree or a plant to grow. And so we absolutely just could not tolerate the pigs being in the community for very long. And so it was a combination of those things where the humans were largely responsible, and even to the extent where they had no idea how damaging it was going to be because they really just didn't have the whole picture of Iceland's ecology. So it wasn't really their fault. We also do know, according to the archaeological record, that they figured it out pretty quickly. They did do things that they could. They tried, for example, to do things like limiting the number of bird eggs that they would take from nests so that they wouldn't exhaust that resource. Um, But again, it was just sort of like, ooh, what else are you going to do? In Iceland, we have so few resources that we can count on that we sort of just ended up in this mess, whether we wanted to or not. Oh my goodness. So I wish you guys could sort of take in this ambiance as well. The scent is quite pungent by now because remember in the soda milk there's an acid. So it's very sort of um, let's see, sort of acidic, but very, ooh, how can I describe? Diane, do you remember?
To me, it's that kind of an earthy smell to it, kind of,
Very earthy,
yeah.
very
Hmm.
gamey, very sort of vinegar. There's an essence of vinegar in there. And let me show you what this is now looking like. And again, remember, I haven't stirred it because that would interfere with the reaction that's going on between the acids and the fats. But this is just what happens naturally. Take my camera off. You guys can see in my pot here. You can see it's sort of bubbly and it's got this wrinkly, sort of cracked appearance on the top. The longer you let it go, the more whey will come to the top and it will get increasingly more yellowed and more cracks will form. This is actually quite soft. But at any point, if you would like, you can gather it up and squeeze out the whey. It just depends on how soft or firm you like your skyr. It's up to you. It's really customizable and it's very forgiving. I've made whey many a time, or sorry, I've made skyr many a time, and I have yet to really what I would call ruin a batch. I've never really thought like, oh, this just isn't right. So it's a very forgiving dish. And when you're done with it, you can add all sorts of things that you like to it. Cinnamon, of course, is hugely popular here. Cinnamon and apples are what we call jólaskyr for Christmas, and things like that. Everything in, let's see, oh, everything around this time of year, they redo the labels. You can see this one, for example, is not just rjómi, but jólarjómi. And so they start also selling jólaskyr, which has the apples and cinnamon already added in for you. How's that for modern convenience? Yeah, it's about time Iceland got some.
Christmas just starting too early, that's all.
I know, right? We've barely cleared Halloween. You guys understand?
Yeah. So
Okay.
you can't really burn the skewer then as you're making it in case you
Right.
get
Yeah, 'cause
sidetracked.
what's happening, of course, is that liquid is coming out of the molecules and it's sort of protecting. I mean, I've never turned my oven or my stove all the way up. So I'm not saying it could never happen. I'm just saying I've so far been lucky. I've also made skin over a campfire, which was a disaster. In that case, for me, I didn't know what I was doing, and the campfire wasn't hot enough. My pot wasn't close enough to the flames, and of course, my chief fear the entire time was, setting the whole extravaganza on fire. So I was too cautious, and I didn't get it to the point where it would split like you see it doing right now with this lovely crackly top. And when I went to squeeze it out of the cheesecloth, it all just sort of went bloop. And I thought, oh, okay. That didn't do what I wanted. But you know what? It really made me think about one of those things that we take for granted when we think about historical cooking, which is a constant oven temperature. Temperature is a huge deal for those of us who are bakers and home cooks. You guys know. And then I realized that day, like, wow, they really had to do some thinking and some ingenious ideas and things to keep the temperature going when they needed to make a product. And
Mhm.
skyr is no exception. So let me see if my assistant is here to help me pour this into the cheesecloth. Brody. This is my genuine Icelandic husband, Frodi. Okay. And as you can see, I'll show you the pan once more. It hasn't gotten it hasn't gotten too crazy since you last saw it. But maybe if I can move this around properly, you can see a little bit on the edges. It's a bit more yellow. That's the way it's sort of collecting in all those delicious little divots. Okay, so now what we're gonna do, we're gonna go ahead and take it and put it in our cheesecloth and see what we can get out of this pot. So, Mr. Frozen, if you would please. So we spread the cheesecloth over a nice big bowl. It's going to be very hot for those of you guys who want to try this recipe at home, so be careful. Let's see. Okay, I will hold the cheesecloth, sir, if you would be so kind.
So on camera.
Yes. Say hello.
Hello.
Hello. Yes. Oh, you're holding it kind of. I think it's gonna. Okay, that's good. Good job. There you go. Ooh, it is nice and frothy and bubbly. Okay. Yep. Okay. And then we're gonna. Oh, could
Can
you?
can you show us what that looks like?
Sure. Can you move the camera there? Mother mia. Okay, so here's what we've got. We have caught all of the curds, the milk solids inside the cheesecloth. And then underneath it, running out of the cheesecloth, is all that whey. And for me, I don't actually use the whey for anything in my nice modern house. But remember, in old-timey Iceland, in medieval Iceland, we would save that and we would have a nice refreshing drink in the summer, or we might use it to keep tomorrow's dinner in so that it wouldn't go off. Oops, am I missing? I'm missing a corner. Okay, yes. Okay, so then we take this, we take the cheesecloth, and ooh, we're gonna squeeze out all this whey. Ooh. Okay, give it a squeeze. Wow, lots of liquid. So we had a good heat on that, and the reaction was going really well. And we're gonna squeeze out some more liquid. And what we're going to be left with are these dried curds. If any of you guys have visited Canada and had poutine, they look very much like the curds that you would find on a nice poutine. Okay, and then, okay, so we're going to squeeze and squeeze. Ooh. Alrighty, ooh, squeeze and squeeze. Remember to roll your sleeves up if you're going to do this at home, my friends. Otherwise, you will have a nice cheesy sweater. Okay, we're gonna keep squeezing and squeezing. Oh, it's a bit hot. And then my dear husband is getting a nice piece of string. Whoop, whoop. I'm gonna keep squeezing. Okay, and we're gonna get a nice piece of string and tie it around the top of the cheesecloth. Here we go. Oops. Yeah.
A little bit too hard there.
It's okay. Let's just do this. And then if you can do it double and tie a knot in it so I can hang it up. Yeah. Okay, so we're making a little package. And what I usually do is hang it right there on my cabinet door. And I leave the bowl here so that it can catch any drips of whey overnight. And then we just let it do its beautiful Skyr magic. And just don't pull too hard. There you go. And there we have it. It looks a little bit suggestive, shall we say, but I'll just let it. That is the magic of Skyr.
All right, that's amazing. Thank you so much for that, Bethany. Um, uh, I think many of us would really like to get that recipe. So if you could maybe scan it and send it to us, we
Oh,
will,
absolutely, I can.
yeah, we'll put it perhaps in our upcoming newsletter
Oh, fantastic.
that's coming out. Um,
Lovely.
yeah, we don't have any more questions right
Okay.
now, but thank you so much. It's just so interesting to hear about how, dairy played such a vital role in the early settlement and how crucial it was for their survival.
It
Um,
absolutely did.
yeah, yeah. And before we end, I just want to let our attendees know that our next newsletter is coming out on about December 1st, and it will be available on our INLUS website along with our earlier webinars or earlier newsletters. And this is our last webinar for 2024. So I want to again thank all who are supporting the INLUS through their memberships and donations. And that makes our webinars and classes and scholarships and grants possible. We wouldn't be able to do all of this without you. A membership, just a reminder, to the INLUS makes a great gift for Christmas. And membership and donation information and online forms can be found on the INLUS website. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today. And Beth, again, thanks for just a wonderful program. Uh, that we do have one question that has come in.
Okay.
How long will the skiers stay fresh?
Well, normally what I do is I give it about 12 hours. And again, if you want a very lactase-free cheese, you can hang it up for even longer, probably about 48 hours, no problem. And then I put it in the refrigerator, and there it's going to be good for about three to 4 weeks.
Okay,
Yeah.
marvelous. So we don't have to eat it all at the next meal. We
No,
can spread it out well, long term. All right.
absolutely.
All right. Well, thanks, Beth, so much. We really appreciated you taking the time to talk with us today and showing us the quick and easy and probably true way to make skyr.
We try. Well, thank you so much for having me. And again, anybody who has more questions or ideas is welcome to email me as well.
Thank you so much, and thank you to all the attendees for today. Bye-bye.